Welcome to Corporate Law Lab. I'm Neil Taylor. If you didn't listen to part one of our interview with Joe Ankus, you should stop now, go back and listen to that. Part one, he covered mental health for lawyers. He's been very active in that, and his personal story is definitely worth listening to. In part two of our interview, he's talking about how legal recruiters do their jobs and what us lawyers need to know about how they do their jobs. So hopefully you'll be right back after listening to that one. If you've already listened to it, enjoy this one. Thank you. Let's pick up the conversation about your career as a legal recruiter.
Sure.
You're often referred to yourself already a few times as a headhunter.
Yep.
So what is a headhunter / legal recruiter, and are there different types?
So basically, what a headhunter is, and I kind of chuckle. I remember the first time somebody says, "So Joe, what do I call you? Like, are you?" And I go, "You can call me Joe." They go, "Well, you're a headhunter, right? Or is that demeaning?" I said, "No, that's a badge of honor, man." I said, "I am what I am. I'm a headhunter. You're a lawyer." I said, "There are euphemisms for lawyers that I'm not going to share." But, I just kind of laugh. So essentially what we do, or collectively as a profession, what we do is we really try to figure out whether we can basically help two parties, which is we've got really two parties. You've got your clients, which are the law firms and corporations that ask me to help them find talent. And then we have candidates, which are people that are working in positions where either they're happy and I can make them happier, or they're miserable and I am getting them a new lease on life, right? So that's basically what we are. And I use the analogy about, being a real estate broker for people, except that, usually when you're a real estate broker, usually you've got one side, you've got the buyer or the seller. Here, oftentimes I've got both. And that can happen in real estate too. You can have the listing and you can bring the buyer. But for the most part, my world is largely spent listening, understanding, and then trying to coordinate, what somebody wants with what my client is offering. It's really trying to weave together the two things and make basically a match. It takes time. You strive to get it right, but you're dealing with human beings. And so when you're dealing with human beings, there is an inherent sense of unpredictability. Every deal always has a kink or a loop or a knot. The larger the transactions, the much more kinkier and knottier they become when you're dealing with partners. But at the end of the day, it is really trying to match and accommodate what both parties want so that everybody can walk away feeling that this was a positive and, for me, a profitable interaction. The way we're paid is we never take money. Well, I shouldn't say never. I never, and any of my colleagues that I respect, we never take money from candidates, meaning lawyers seeking to get a job. They don't pay us. We are paid by our clients who have asked us to help them. So, our fees are paid by our clients, and the fees are generally a percentage of the lawyer's first year salary. For antitrust reasons, I don't go into fees other than to tell you that, it's freely negotiable between the recruiter and the law firm. But that's how we're compensated. And yes, it is a commission-only business for the most part. Yes, you can go many months without closing a deal. Yes, you can get lucky and close a few in a relatively short period of time. But for somebody who is looking for a steady, regular W-2 paycheck with benefits and perks, I don't recommend this as a business. You have to have an incredibly thick skin and resiliency, because it's kind of just anecdotally, I think this will illustrate the point about my business. So when I got started in 91, I remember coming home And my wife would say to me, literally, did you close the deal today? And it was like my first or second day. I said, no, I haven't closed the deal. And every day she'd be like, come on, did you close the deal today? I'm like, no. And then finally, after like about 10 days, I said, I think I should probably tell you when I close a deal rather than you asking me every day, because the way I see this business working, it's not a daily occurrence. It's not a weekly occurrence. I said, I've been doing it for whatever, a month now. It's not a monthly occurrence. And it was kind of funny. So I started in, October of 91. I closed my first deal in January of 92. Now, there were reasons. The economy at that time wasn't great, and I was learning the business, et cetera. But the point is yes, this is a business that, there is no settlement in my business, as I'm fond of saying. It's like Yoda. You do or you do not do. There is no try. You either close your deal and the person makes it, or you don't close the deal and you earn nothing. And yes, I can tell you that I've been on deals that I've taken on for a year and a half, and at the end, poof, puff of smoke. Joe, you're a great guy, but I've decided to go to a different opportunity. And you just sit there and this is the classic conflict between what I say and what I think. I'm like, that's fantastic. I go, I am so happy for you. And I'm like, part of me actually is, because, most candidates they're honest. They tell you what's going on. They don't lie to you. Most people don't lie. But it's so funny because you're like, through gritted teeth, that is wonderful. And you're like, I just spent a year and a half courting this guy. I'm going to have a destroyed client. I said, I ended up with nothing. I'm going to go to Publix. It's going to be another ramen noodle night. And so, so I've seen both sides. I've seen both sides. But I don't, at this stage, you ask me what it's like to be a recruiter. I never get married to a deal. I don't get married. There's no marriage anymore in my life. I used to, obsess over these things. I don't obsess over them. I do the best I can. I genuinely want it to be right. Many times a good recruiter, and I'll put myself in the category of being a good recruiter, is you've got to have the courage to keep people apart also, which is, if you have a candidate that tells you, Joe, I'm at 2,400 hours right now, please do not bring me to a firm that's going to ask the same thing. I please don't. Then I'm just not going to try to sugarcoat or blow smoke in their face and tell them, oh no, this firm doesn't do 2,400 when I know in fact they will. Or Joe, I need a firm that requires, only 10% traveling. Well, I'm not going to send them to a firm where I know for a fact, because of their practice, these people are traveling 35, 40%. A good recruiter just keeps people apart. You don't try to slap things together and hope and pray, because what happens is, if you try to slap things together and hope and pray, you end up with a candidate that leaves, a client that's mad, and you make no money. So there's no incentive to do bad deals. You're only incentivized, ironically, to do good deals, because that's how you're going to get paid, and it's the right thing to do for your candidate and your client. A lot of recruiters get into this business because all they have is a phone and a couple databases, and there's no barrier to entry. There's no licensing requirement, and they just lie, and they embellish, and they are, solely focused on just throwing as much stuff against the wall, playing a numbers game, and hoping it sticks. And I try to tell recruiters, I'd much rather you not make 100 phone calls that end up with nothing. I'd rather you make 10 targeted phone calls to people you really can help and actually do something constructive for them, versus just dialing and just praying. I said, wishing and hoping is not the name of a recruiting firm. It really isn't.
So if you're a lawyer and you're dealing with a recruiter, how do you know whether you have a Joe Ankus who is in it to make sure there's a winning deal, or one of the people that has a database and a cell phone and is just trying to see how many people they can churn through this machine to see what comes out the other end?
I tell people, to the extent that they'll listen, it's on my website. I say, look, it doesn't matter who you choose to work with. I said, but I would ask you to ask them how long have they been doing this? How many placements have they made? Do they have references from candidates and clients? Who are some of the clients they've made placements with? I mean, just ask, just do your due diligence. You'll find out very quickly if they tell you the truth. But a lot of people, I mean, I see it all the time in my business. Recruiters, it's literally just slapping stuff together and hoping and praying. I mean, I've gotten involved in situations where candidates will call me. They're already working with another recruiter, and they're like, "Joe, I got referred to you," and I say, "Well, where are you in your search?" They're like, "Well, I've been working with this recruiter for 3 months, blah blah blah." There's nothing I can do for them other than they ask my opinion, and they're like, "Well, I'm thinking of going to this firm," and I'm like, "Well," I said, "did the recruiter tell you that in the last 6 months they lost 4 associates? No. Do you realize that in the last year they lost 3 of the out of the 9 equity partners they lost 3? No." I'm like, "Well, you know govern yourself accordingly." And a lot of recruiters just they'll just BS and hope and pray. And so you know do your due diligence, no matter who you use. There's a lot of very good recruiters, people that are good, that care, that know what they're doing. It's like any other profession: lawyers, doctors, accountants, engineers. Would you go to a doctor without necessarily, if it's really important, your career is important, you're going to want to go and do some homework. And so that's what I tell them: have a list of questions and find out what the answers are before you actually commit to working with somebody. That would be my advice to anybody. And look, you're dealing with human beings. I mean, there are some people who prefer somebody with a different personality than mine. Some people prefer my person. I mean, it's a very individualized thing. And you should interview a few recruiters. And like anything, interviewing lawyers. A major client may not necessarily just hire a particular law firm. They may actually do a little bit of due diligence and actually talk to somebody. So that's kind of my advice for a lawyer that's looking.
So what is retained search?
So retained search is basically, everybody will have a different definition, but let me give you the kind of generalized sense of what a retained search is. A retained search is when a client reaches out to me or another recruiter and says, "Look, we've got a very, very specific, urgent need, and we want to basically retain you, i.e. pay you a portion of a fee up front to guarantee that we know you're working on the search," right? That's really what it is. Somebody would basically, the way it happens with me is somebody will call me and say, "Joe, we need to hire X." And I'll go, "Okay. What's your urgency level on a 1 to 10? It's like a 6. I mean, we have a need, but it's like a 6. And I say, "Okay, well, if I get them, you'll get them, I may work on it, I may not work on it." But once in a while, somebody will call me and say, "We've got a problem." And I'm like, "What's the problem?" They're like, "Unfortunately, we just had a couple people leave, and they serviced some of our biggest clients. The client wants to stay with us. The other lawyers are trying to pull them out, to go with them. But we've had sometimes it goes back, we've had a 50-year relationship with the firm, and they're like, "Joe, you got to help us fill this gap like yesterday." And I'm like, and they're like, "Well, we need you on this." And and that's how you get retained. It's retainers, or law firms will call from out of state and they'll say, "We want to open in South Florida." And I'll say, "Okay, that's more of a retained type of search." And the reason why you take them is because you know how much time you're going to spend, and you know that the odds of success are slim. So you want to get compensated for your time,
Got it.
But yeah.
So how should an attorney engage with legal recruiters, and does the answer change as you gain experience over time?
Um, I want to make sure I understand the question. How should an attorney best engage with
I
us?
guess the question is, say I'm sitting at my desk and I decide maybe the grass is greener outside. Do I start asking around who's the best recruiter in town? I'm going to call Joe. Joe's going to get me the next job. I think there's a lot of I purposefully packed a lot of what I suspect is quite unrealistic into the question.
No, no, the question actually makes sense. And I think,
Okay.
like anything in life, we often feel the most comfortable when we get a referral from somebody that's had an experience with somebody, right? So a lot of the stuff, a lot of people I get are from referrals, and it's much more pleasant for me, and it's much more pleasant for the candidate because the road's already been paved, right? Joe, I'm calling you because Craig referred me to you. Oh my God, Craig's great. How's he doing? Blah blah blah. There's just kind of an affinity there. But what I would say is referrals are a wonderful source. If somebody's had a positive experience, if somebody knows somebody that had a positive experience, absolutely. Uh, referrals to me, referrals are better than just a random call in the middle of the day because you don't until you do your due diligence, you don't know what you're dealing with. Um, and recruiters are relentless. I mean, I know for a fact that for any lawyer at a large firm, um, it is not unusual for them to be called, LinkedIn, emailed, and texted on a weekly basis. If you're at an AmLaw 100 firm, I'm thinking at least at a minimum 8 to 10 times a week. I mean, it's gotten to be it's I use the word ridiculous. I mean, I actually, even though it's what I do for a living, I feel for these people. I actually feel for them because they're more polite and patient than I probably would be if I was on the receiving end of it. And it's kind of like they're bombarded, and the problem is they're all working hard, they're exhausted, their time is precious, and if you get some idiot that doesn't know what they're doing talking to you, nobody wins again. You've just wasted their time. My job is made infinitely harder because of bad recruiters, because when I talk to somebody that I don't know, and I still make cold calls, I still do it. You have to, in my opinion, you have to. And people are like, they don't know who I am from a hole in the wall. They have no idea. And I don't blame them for it. And a lot of people are curt, they're polite, but they're curt. And I get it. I'm an uninvited interruption into their day. So I've got to really make sure, it's like lightning in a bottle. I've got to, number one, have somebody that's qualified. Number two, has an interest in hearing about what I have. And number three, that my client would want to see them. And then number four, that's all the prerequisites just to try to get them through the door. And then you have the whole dance about the interview offer process.
I think you skipped a step that was at the very beginning. You have a client who's looking for something, not you're randomly calling people because that's how you enjoy, spend your day.
Yeah,
And
I
and that
don't.
may be a difference between what some people get. Where I mean, I've certainly got calls from headhunters, not anymore, now that I'm at this advanced age, but when I was a young associate in a big law firm, I would get calls from headhunters, and I would say, "Well, what is the opportunity?" "Oh, don't worry about that. I want to find out if you're actually interested." And I'm like, "Well, I'm not having this conversation,
Yeah, well,
right?"
yeah, we run into it. It's so funny. I mean, like when you ask, like, kind of, you get it from behind the curtain with me, right? So, so this is one of the amusing things about my job. So if I call somebody, I don't just pick up the phone. I've never done it because to me it's just goofy. I don't pick up somebody unless I'm calling them for a reason. They may not have an interest in what I'm calling them for, but there's a search that I have that I think they could be good for. So I have a reason. So what happens is they'll pick up the phone, they'll answer the phone and say hello, and I'll say hi. This is Joe Ankus. And by the way, I tell people who I am and what I do. I know recruiters that leave messages. This is a personal matter. all this kind of stuff. I'm like, I will never do it. I just won't do it. I always tell people, they go, nobody calls me back. That's what a new recruiter, their lament. Nobody calls me back. Nobody's talking to me. I said, you want 100% callback ratio? I said, I can get you guaranteed callback every time. They go, yeah, tell me. I said, okay. Call them and tell them, number one, you're from the lottery, they've won. Number two, you're from the IRS and you have something you need to talk to them about. I said, they'll call you back in a minute. I said, now when you tell them you're a headhunter, I said, it's going to go south.
It's not.
I said, but if you want a 100% callback, I'm going to tell you what to do. But what happens is we're always, at least me, I'm on guard for what I call the tire kickers, okay, and the opportunists. And this is how the conversation goes. Hey Charlie, it's Joe Ankus. I'm a lawyer. I'm a legal recruiter. I'm working on this search. Oh, hey Joe, who's your client? I don't have a lot of time. Who's your client? Okay. Now, there was a time where I'd be like, oh, my client is, XYZ. And they're like, oh, thanks. I'm not interested. Hang up the phone. And I'm like, I always felt empty after that. I felt empty. So I said, there's got to be a better way. So what I'd say to them is I go, I'm happy to tell you who my client is. I don't have a problem with that. I said, it's a firm you probably know. I said, and they reached out to me. I said, but all I want to do, I said, they don't want their name on the street. I said, I'm saying this is a quasi-confidential search. I don't have a problem telling you who it is. If you give me 5 minutes, just so I know that your background lines up with what my guys want, I promise I will end this call. I will tell you who my client is. And the funny part is if they're just a tire kicker or they just want the name so they can pass it on to their recruiter friend to screw me over, then they're just, they're not going to give me the time. And then I at least hang up knowing I still retain my dignity. But so many recruiters, in an effort to ingratiate themselves, just blare out who their client is. I'm like, don't do that. I said, if they can't give you the 5 minutes to credibly tell you what they do, they're a tire kicker, and that's just kind of to give you a sense from my side of the desk how I work it.
It makes sense. I guess my complaint was the recruiters who were trying to amass something to sell.
Oh yeah, no,
before they had someplace to sell.
No, I've never. It's hard enough to do what we do. That would be the ultimate in difficulty. Hi, you don't know me. You don't know anything about me, yet I'm going to ask you what you're earning. I'm going to ask you everything that you don't like, blah, blah, blah. Who the hell, oh, and by the way, I'm just doing this in case something comes up. Why would anybody in their right mind? Trust me, when I have good jobs, it's still hard enough to get people to listen. Although I do chuckle, Neil, as a recruiter, the thing I do chuckle about is I love when people say to me, and this is, I understand it, but I chuckle. I'll have an opportunity that's good, and I'll call somebody and I'll say, hey, Charlie, this is Joe Ankus. I'm a lawyer and legal recruiter. I'm not interested. And depending on my mood and depending whether I've eaten or not, I'll sometimes say, but you didn't even hear what I had to say. And sometimes they'll go, click. And sometimes they'll say, fair enough. And then they'll say, no, thank you. But at least I got my pitch. But it's funny because, I can tell you that when it comes to your career, normally you can be happy and in a great job, but untruthfully, until you at least see if they're telling you kind of what they have, you never know what, So I always kind of chuckle about that. I'm like, before you hang, I totally get you can hang up on me, but if you say, for example, I could be calling you at a firm and have, I'm not exaggerating. I could have a killer job with a Fortune company that is paying more than but you're not even going to let me get to that point. So it's kind of funny that way. We have plenty of funny stories. Can I tell you one funny recruiting story?
Yeah, that's why we're here.
I want to tell you a funny recruiting story. This is a great one, about the weird things we see, since you want to know the day in the life of a recruiter.
Yep.
One of the best was I placed a lawyer. The lawyer starts at 9:00 in the morning, and my client calls me up at around 1:30 or 2 and says, the lawyer never came back after lunch. And I said,
Oh
for
my.
real? And the lawyer just never came back. So I said to the client, can I bill by the minute? I mean, and the client had tears in their eyes. The guy he just decided he didn't want to go back. I mean, that was a funny one. I mean, I've had another one years and years ago where a lawyer, had gotten an offer with a corporation, and the corporation wanted to do a drug test. And I'm like this, Mr. Straight and Narrow. And I'm like, so I said to the candidate, I said, hey, I said, the client needs you to just to swing by and just do a drug test. And you hear this silence on the phone. And I'm like, what's the problem? And you hear this silence. And I'm like, what's going on? And they said, well, I was at a party and I took a hit off of a joint. And I said, oh, I said, well, I said, but I was kind of fumbling. I didn't know what to say. And they go, but don't worry. I'm actually going out of town for a couple of weeks to help my grandma. And when I come back, I'll take it. And so they came back, took it, passed. And they've been in that job now for, oh my God, it's got to be close to 20 years.
Wow.
And one of the, phenomenal credentials. But it was just so funny. I mean, we have these funny things that happen. You name it, we've seen it. We've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. But for the most part, clients are honest, candidates are honest for the most part. You have your outliers, but for the most part, I enjoy what I do. It's not easy. It takes time, it takes effort. But for me, it's been, my career for 3+ decades.
So let's talk briefly about when you're in a down market for everyone. Like you talked about when you left Holland and Knight and started as a recruiter. That was the same recession that I graduated into, and an awful lot of my colleagues. I was lucky in that I got an offer off of my second summer clerkship. But a lot of my friends didn't have jobs coming out of school because the market was just terrible.
Yeah, it was.
And if you're in one of those situations where either that your job's going to go away, I don't know, you're a government lawyer or something like that, and you need to find something, how do those people engage with you, or can they?
So it's not only a good question, it's a relevant question, it's a fair question. And here's what I can only speak for what I do. There's a fundamental issue here, not an issue, there's a fundamental, I guess it is an issue, is that there are things that we can do effectively and things we cannot do effectively. And so when somebody has been downsized to no fault of their own, in almost every circumstance, I will help them by giving them my best counsel about what to do. Highly unlikely I will send their resume under my banner because they don't have the confidentiality concerns that a lot of people have that I work with. So I don't want to put my fee on top of their head when they are able to do their own search. So I have guided people on how to do their own searches, and I'll give them the benefit of my resources, and talk to them and tell them what I think and guide them that way. A recruiter that takes somebody who is downsized and just decides to shotgun their resume, they're doing that candidate a huge disservice. They're screwing up that candidate. To me, it's irresponsible. It's irresponsible. I know people do it. I won't do it. The only exception would be if I had a rare situation where the person's skill lined up with what a client had said, we're desperate for X, then there's value. But 99.99% of the time, I will talk to them, I will give them my best advice, but they really should not be using a recruiter. They should not be.
I remember at some level, though, all of those jobs, I'll just tell you, in my own situation, when I decided it was time to leave Avnet. I had a conversation with the GC and said, I think I want to get off the bus because I'll be coming back to a smaller job than the one I left. And that's, we can do a whole thing on the dangers of expatism. But and he's like, "Oh, fine, get off the bus then. Here's how much time I'll give you." So I was, and I remember having a conversation with a recruiter in Germany, I think, who told me, "Listen," and this was after several months of me just kind of aimlessly fishing around. He said, "Listen, there's probably not 5 jobs a year that come up looking for your particular skill set, in Europe, familiar with, U.S. public company reporting, litigation background." He says, "But when one of those comes up, there's probably not 10 of you in the world that could do it, right? So, be patient sounds terrible, but, the next day his Luxembourg office called me and said, 'Can you be in Luxembourg City tomorrow afternoon?'" It was Millicom. But, on the one hand, I don't know that I would have got that call if I hadn't got on that guy's radar. And I'd had so many frustrating interactions with recruiters leading up to that point.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, and believe me, it's your frustration. I hear the bad stories all the time. I also hear a lot of the good stories. We are not miracle workers. I mean, I always feel badly trying to explain, where I can be most effective. And the way I have concluded that I can be succinct and direct is I tell people routinely, I said, "Look, I work in one of 3 distinct categories. And if you are not in one of these 3 distinct categories, doesn't mean I won't listen, doesn't mean I won't help you, talk to you, give you my best advice." I said, "But if you're not in one of these 3 categories, I'm just telling you, the odds of me having anything are very slim. If you're a 3 to 5 year lawyer with top credentials, I can help you. If you are a partner that has around $1 million or more in business at market competitive hourly rates based on the firm you're with, I can help you." I said, "If you are a top credentialed lawyer that is willing to take a reduction in comp and I have decent in-house jobs, I can help you." I said, "But if you fall outside those very rigid parameters, I can offer a kind, listening, sympathetic ear and give you the benefit of what I know," all sorts of stuff like that. I said, "But you have to please understand." I always tell them, I say to candidates all the time, "If you don't hear from me again, it doesn't mean I don't love you. I love you." I said, "I have nothing to tell you." I said, "So do not take it personally." And they all appreciate that because they go, "I'm so sick of you guys. You call me, you sweet talk me, and then you never call me back." I said, "Well, I'm just going to sweet talk you now and tell you may never hear from me again." and they appreciate it, But to add one little point on this, one of the things that I've taken tremendous joy in as a recruiter, uncompensated, and I'm happy to do it, and I will continue to do it until I'm not doing it until I retire, is bringing people together for reasons independent of recruiting. For example, I was working, this was only a week ago, I was working with a fella, young real estate associate, who made the decision that they thought they might want to go into academia. And super nice guy, and being kind of an academic, I empathize. I really can know where he's coming from. I resonate with him. And I said, and he wanted to get a PhD in history. And I said, all of a sudden the light goes off in my head. And I said, well, my niece's husband just earned his PhD from Columbia in history. And I said, I would love to connect you with him. It has nothing to do with recruiting, but it was just taking a connection of somebody I knew with somebody that was a good kid, and doing that, and they talked for an hour. It was great. And that for me is the collateral benefit of bringing people together. Whether you make money or not, doesn't matter. I've had it happen many times on the mental health side where somebody is struggling, really struggling, and I say, look, if you want to talk to somebody, I said, I can, just know it's not economic for me. There's no money in this, but if you are struggling, I know a psychologist, PhD, who specializes in working with attorneys in Florida. And it's been incredibly helpful for them. And they're just like, Joe, thank you. I would have known how to find this person. And I said, it's my joy. This is my joy to do. So, a good recruiter is going to be a matchmaker on a lot of different levels. And I consider that, part of my job,
Yeah, and and the story that I was telling you, I don't consider it a bad story. I mean, very happy ending. I spent 3 wonderful years at Millicom, most of them on airplanes, but it was it was a great time in my life, and I'm glad to have done it. What was different between then and now, I think, is maybe the internet, LinkedIn, ZipRecruiter, all of them. So I've got a series of what I've said were asking for a friend questions. But like the jobs we see on Indeed, ZipRecruiter, LinkedIn, are those real?
I think the honest answer is some are. This having been in-house. There are what I call ghost posts, which are they post them ostensibly looking, but they've already decided who they're going to hire. It's a ghost post. It's not for real.
Well, they have an internal rule that they have to post it.
There's it's a ghost post. Could somebody actually apply that might blow the socks off? It's let's just call it their due diligence, right? But they've already tapped the person. It's a fait accompli. Other times, I am suspicious. The ones that I consider more tilting towards fake posts are when recruiting firms post jobs that are a bit vague. I think they're trolling at that point. Sometimes they're trolling just to get resumes. And then, not always, but it has been done where they're fake jobs. Law firms will post jobs. And the reality is there may be a soft need, but they just kind of wonder what the market's like. They're building their database. There's the jobs that are posted definitely exist on a spectrum from complete BS all the way up to and including a desperate need and really every permutation in between. But is there chicanery? Yeah, there definitely is. There definitely is. There definitely is.
So that probably answers the question when you see a job on the internet that yours is your CV, and you're like, okay, they want 15 to 20 years experience. I have 17. They want it in this geography. I'm there. They want this education. I've got it. They want, and you're like, you go tick, 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 tick. Why am I not even, what happened? I never heard anything.
Right? Yeah, absolutely. I hear this all the time. Here's what I'll tell you. When I tell people this, I said, if you see a position that's posted with an identifiable company, don't even bother applying online. I said, go on LinkedIn and see if you have any relationship with the general counsel. I said, and try to go directly to the general counsel. I said, I know it breaches protocol, all this crap. I said, but when stuff goes into HR, and it's not an assault on HR. What it is it's just pragmatic. They get so much stuff coming in, the filtration system simply gets overwhelmed. If it's a major publicly traded company, they're going to be overwhelmed. The filtration system is going to be overwhelmed. The drain gets backed up. I'm like, if you can figure out a way to circumvent, then I want you to do that and try it, and get yourself in a better position. But if can you get through the morass of HR? It's possible. I'll tell you a very brief funny story about HR. So I had an engagement with a publicly traded company many years ago. They wanted to hire an attorney, and they reached out to me and they said, Joe, we want to hire somebody. And I said, okay. I said, I'm happy to do it. I said, I want an exclusive. I said, because I don't want to put the name out there, blah, 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 and then get sideswiped by somebody. I said, so once you give me the search, it's like a real estate listing. I'm not asking for any money. I'm just saying I've got the exclusive. All candidates run through me. And they signed my agreement happily. And then the first thing I said was, now what I'd like you to do is give me every single resume you've received from your prior postings that went through HR, that HR rejected. And so I got a stack like this thick. I went physically over to their office. And so I start looking through the stack, and, to HR's credit, did a pretty good job. I would say 90% of them were bad. But I shouldn't say bad, strike that. They weren't qualified
They
for the
weren't
job.
matches.
They wasn't a match.
Right.
But there was one that I looked at, and I said, this is the person they need to hire. And it was, in the pile with a big X on it, and I laughed, and I called, the GC, or the AGC, and I said, this is the person you need to hire. And they ended up interviewing, fell in love, hired, person stayed there for a number of years, in excess of 10 years. I got paid my full fee. There was nothing but thank you. And, I didn't dwell on the fact that they had turned them down. No reason for that. But the point is that story illustrates what can happen to good candidates. Again, HR is generally not staffed by people that read legal resumes, right? You and I can read a resume differently because we know what we're looking for. We just know. It's not. I'd be all thumbs if I was looking at a tech resume. I'd be all thumbs. I'd turn down people because I don't know what the hell I'm looking at. So. But that story was just so funny. It was particularly delightful to send a bill when all I had to do was go through their pile of people that they said no, and said, no, this is the one.
It's funny, and it may have an impact. I mean, people like me and you that went to state schools, when you said that about tech, right? Well, I wouldn't know my way around a tech resume, but I know what MIT is.
Right.
I know what, and so
Caltech is.
Right. I know what Caltech is. And so if you gave me, said, okay, great, you're the head of HR, which I've done a few times, and now you need to hire for this tech job, and you gave me a pile of resumes, I would, the Caltech one I'd put here, the University of Florida one I might put in this stack, the Cincinnati one I'd be like, yeah, that is an engineering school. Okay, it goes over here. But, that's probably what happens. That's probably what used to happen with HR screening resumes, because based on your story, we're talking about when there was paper in the world. And today, I don't even know that it's getting that look. It's probably going through some screening algorithm. Even if they insist that a real person is looking at all of our resumes. Yeah, they may have a real person looking at all of those resumes, and I'd be willing to bet you lunch that person is also using some algorithm /AI to make sure.
Now, I tell people if they're going to do that, make sure your resume has those, the keywords and mirror the job. All the little tricks, I'm sure that it's being done that way. And yes, you were right. At the time that occurred, it was human input looking at something. Yes, there was, simply didn't exist back then. It was that long ago. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess then it is as hard as it sounds, right? If you are out there looking and you are trying to do it on the basis of what you're seeing on the internet, because you're encountering a number of jobs that are, as you called them, ghost posts, or somebody trying to see what's out there.
They're trolling.
You've got the algorithm to get through. You've got that if it's a recognizable company, if Meta has posted that they want somebody and your CV resume is an exact match of the job description, there's probably a couple hundred of you.
Any time a Fortune company that has a good job post, you know it is going to, spread like wildfire. And a lot of qualified, yes, the answer is they're not going to get just one qualified resume at that level for those types of companies. No, there's going to be, how many I don't know, but there's going to be more than one for sure.
So let's talk, and I've taken up a lot of your time,
It's
and
a
I promise
pleasure.
not to take up much more. Let's talk about advice for new and future lawyers. Do you see AI having an impact already?
For sure. Absolutely. So, in brief, it's a little, I would say the development of AI, by analogy, reminds me of when you and I were first exposed to the internet. We knew it wasn't going anywhere. It was just a question of how we were going to adapt to it, how we were going to use it. And now let's be real, it is part of it. It's integrated into it's part of us now. It is what it is. It's a one-way ratchet.
Yeah, 35 years ago, this conversation only happens if one of us flies,
Right.
right?
And so with AI, so I can tell you what I've seen from the field in terms of recruiting, and what I've seen in the academic side of things. In the recruiting field, what I see is that it's helpful for generating all sorts of templates and stuff like that. As far as lawyers, young lawyers, new lawyers coming out, it is, and it should be treated as what it is. It's a tool. It should not be elevated to the highest echelons. It shouldn't be relegated to the garbage bin. It is a tool, but it, to me, has to be used judiciously, and it has to be used carefully, because it can write pretty well. It can. I'm kind of frustrated. I guess I'm jealous. Frustrated isn't the right word. I guess I'm jealous because it really leveled the playing field, where writing, when you could write fairly effectively, it was a skill. It was something that it had value. And now, I read some of the AI generated stuff, and it's pretty good. And I'm like, wow, any competitive edge I had as being able to write, it's kind of been eroded pretty quickly by technology. The law students, for the most part, I think, are told that it's appropriate in its right place and time. The biggest concern I have for it, and I have for AI in general, is simply losing the ability, especially as lawyers, to critically think. To me, if we lose the ability to critically think, and just delegate that thinking to a computer, that to me is just not going to be beneficial, because there's this intrinsic need for viscerally thinking about things, and to create the analytical process and understanding how to apply facts to case law. I mean, it's a contact sport. It's not an input-output sport. So for me, I would tell my students, look, I know it's here, and if you want to use it, but my job is to teach you still how to critically think. I said, I have failed if I have delegated this out to AI. I cannot, as a professor in good conscience, not teach you how to critically think. And the only way that it will have impact on you is to say this: imagine there was no power. Because if I take away the power, and you have no electricity and no computer, and you had to do this by candlelight, and you sat there and were paralyzed because you couldn't, that to me is a problem. I want you to think about candlelight and no power. And then once you can do it in candlelight and no power, then knock yourself out. But you have to have the fundamental grounding in how to do this. And people kind of sober up when I tell them that, because they go, well, I'll always have the internet. So suppose you don't. Just suppose you don't. I know it's academic, but suppose you don't. And I try to make my point that way.
Yeah, and I suppose the I don't know. It may get there, it may not. But today, it's not at a place where, like you said, it can write very well. And it doesn't necessarily have the same personality, but it's got more
Nope.
personality than it used to. What I've found, though, is that it is not yet an expert at analyzing, right?
No, no.
If it could describe your job very well. It couldn't deal with the nuances of it, and the
A thousand
nuances
percent.
are what you need us for.
A 1,000%. And I think this is where there is a happy marriage between AI and still retaining critical analysis, which is it's a wonderful starting point for a template, for a root, for a base. It's a wonderful starting point, can get you off writer's block. There's certain things it can do. But I think you and I have read enough AI stuff where I got to tell you, I can sure as heck tell you when a student uses it. Absolutely, I can. They haven't fooled me yet when it comes to AI. Because as you said, it may be flawless writing, but dubious substance. And that's where the marriage comes in, which is, okay, you can use it as a framework. You can use it as kind of a template to get started. But the magic is going to be, as you said, in that nuance. It doesn't, it seems to thrive on the edges of ambiguity, right? It never commits, really. It tends to hedge its bets. It's less likely to take a firm position on something. From the stuff that I've seen, it's squishy, right? So, and then already, and I still think this is ludicrous that lawyers are using it to cite fake citations. To me, you've seen these cases come out, right, where these lawyers are drafting briefs
Yeah,
with
and I just look like at that level, I'm just like, okay, fraud is still fraud,
right. No,
So if we have to spend a lot of time telling people now that AI is here that didn't declare open season on fraud.
I don't know what to. If I was the court and somebody was citing, Mary Had a Little Lamb versus Little Red Riding Hood, and actually thinking this is binding precedent, I mean, I'd have a big. I mean, this is bad and you
Yeah.
pointed it out for the exact reason. If somebody relies, and judges are allowed, and courts are allowed to rely on the briefs we submit, right? They're allowed to say, I take it at face value, counselor, that case stands for the proposition in which you say, and they're affecting somebody's rights and privileges based on something that does not exist. It's Harry Potter stuff. I got to tell you, you don't want me on your jury, man, because
Yeah.
it's not going to end well,
Yep. Have you seen it have an impact on hiring and staffing levels yet, or can you tell?
Not that I can. I don't believe so. I have not that I'm aware of. No.
Okay.
In my experience, not yet. Nobody's referenced it to me. I haven't seen it.
Okay. When you're trying to fill a search and you're looking for the lawyer, aside from ticking the boxes of they want somebody with X amount of experience or equivalent, the 5 things they've asked for, the 10 or 20, however many they ask for. What are you looking for in addition to that? When you're talking to a lawyer, what do you see that's helpful that lawyer says or does or doesn't do?
It's a great question, and I think that's what is the essence of being a competent recruiter is I can match up your skills with what my client wants. Okay, that tends to be much more, rote. My client needs somebody that's a commercial litigator that's had at least 25 depositions, argued 15 motions, and spends most of their time in state court. I mean, I can line those variables up through proper questioning. It's not hard. The art of being a good recruiter is actually going beneath that, which is, what does my candidate really want? What do they really want? And what I mean by that is, what is most important to them as a person and as a lawyer? For my client, what do you want in temperament, personality? It's the stuff off the page, right? I don't want to say the soft stuff. I don't like that. It's not soft stuff, but it is stuff that doesn't lend itself to keyword searches and binary things. It's only drawn out through conversation. A lot of times somebody, I'll say, why do you want to make a change? And they'll say, I want more responsibility. And a lot of people will go, okay, and they think they know what that means. But a good recruiter will say, I think I know what that means, but that doesn't matter. What does more responsibility mean to you in your own words? Tell me what it means. That's when I can be of most value. For them, more responsibility, they might say, I want direct client contact. I want to be, one of the primary point people on the file. Now, my client may say, fantastic, that aligns with our idea of more responsibility. Or my client might say, that does not align, because nobody talks to the client except the managing partner. Like, whatever it is, we're trying to ferret out the alignment versus the misalignment when somebody uses vague words like more responsibility, better atmosphere, even something like, better, work environment. I have to ferret out what that means to that person. I can't substitute my judgment. I call that playing God. It's cost me hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars because I played God and thought that I knew better than what my candidate knew. And I've learned that lesson, and I learn it all the time. You think I would have learned it. I still learn it. But and AI can't ever replicate that. That requires interpersonal communication, period. There's no other way around it. You have to listen for the ambiguity, define the ambiguity, explain it to your client, and actually see if there really is a meeting of the minds.
So it requires you both to spend a lot of time understanding the candidates, but also understanding your client.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you have to know, just like there's no perfect job, there's no perfect people. I mean, everybody's got their challenges. There are partners with idiosyncrasies. You know this, you lived it. I don't mind that they have idiosyncrasies. I just need to know what they are. Because once I know what they are, I can explain them to my candidate, and they may go, it doesn't bother me that person is X. I can handle that. It's when people don't tell me what I need to know, or they try to, put lipstick on, the proverbial pig. That's what creates the problems. I try to accelerate the honeymoon phase before there's even a honeymoon, so I can cut to the bottom line to make sure that there's alignment before they ever even accept the job.
Yeah, no, and in the time that we worked together, I was hiring an associate general counsel for Latin America at Millicom, and it was, partly because I was constantly in Africa, Luxembourg, and Southeast Asia, where we also were doing business. And so I told you, I need somebody willing to accept responsibility. And it was, which is one of those words that could mean whatever. And you, to your credit, kept at it long enough to find that what I meant by that is he or she may not see me for 2 or 3 weeks because there's some other fire that's kicked off on some other part of the world, and I need to know that person can step in for me.
Yeah.
And so it required somebody. I wasn't particularly hung up on how many years they'd been out, but much more whether they had the presence to go into a room in San Salvador and be me, for that day, right?
Yeah, and that only comes about. AI is not going to do that.
Right.
That's just not in the game plan for AI. Just a very brief anecdote. I know we want to wrap up. I had another search for a client where the CEO was in the 1/4 of 1/8 of 1% club, self-made billionaire, just off the chart kind of thing, but would routinely hold business meetings 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning. This person wanted their lawyer to literally and figuratively be on call 24/7 because they were up at these hours, traveling the globe. This was one of these type of unicorn, in a purple suit type of individual. And I would say, I ended up placing somebody there, and I said to them, you, like one of these, look at me. Do you understand that you more likely than not, will be summoned to things at 2, 3, and 4 o'clock in the morning? Do you can't take this job unless you tell me verbatim you understand. That to me is what a good recruiter does. Doesn't say, well, they keep a little odd hours, but you'll be all right. That would be cruel. That would be cruel to do to somebody. You got to tell people what you know.
Well, and just to end my story, you did such a good job that Sal is still there.
I know, it's crazy.
And has been general counsel for 4 times longer than I was.
I know. Well, as I'm fond, once in a while we get it right. Once in a while
you did that one right.
Once in a while we get it right, but so much fun. I mean, I hope I was able to answer your questions and really give your listeners, kind of behind the curtain what it's really like. What it is like for the person on the other end of the phone when we call.
So I have one more question for you, and then I'll stop. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
My dad was a lawyer. My dad was one of my closest. He was my best friend. And when I was 15, I'm sure I was the typical rebellious, annoying, and otherwise, just pain teenager. And my dad was a man of few words, very, very quiet guy. So when he talked, I listened. And one day I come into my room and I find a piece of yellow legal paper. And he had this written on it. And it said something to the effect of, to Joseph, and if he calls me Joseph, I'm in trouble. To Joseph, something to consider, : I shall pass through this world but once. Any good, therefore, that I can do, or any kindness that I can show to any human being, let me do it now. Let me not defer it or neglect it, for I shall not pass this way again. And he wrote that on that legal paper. And I actually I still have it somewhere, and I laminated it. And I've kept it, now for, over 45 years. Actually, 45 years. And I really try to live that as best I can. I certainly fall short of it. But, it's a ride we're on. And in my job and in your job, there are people that we're going to encounter where they need our help today. They need our help right now. And if we can show them kindness, even a kind word, just do it. Because there may not be, another chance to do it. And I've really tried to live as complete as I can to that. Like I said, I fall short all the time. But you asked me a fair question, and I would say that would be certainly one of my top things for people to reflect on, which is, do good when you can, and pretty much any time is a good time to do good.
Fantastic way to end, Joe. Thank you so much. It's great to talk to you again.
My pleasure. Great seeing you. I just hope you enjoy.